Hello, everyone. Welcome to the National Black Caucus, ANM. Today's presentation is a discussion regarding agent provocateurs, infiltrators, and other disruptors to leftist movements. The key to this discussion is not to be paranoid or finger anyone, but education and awareness. Many of us join these movements from the heart, while other orgs and agencies may not want to see leftist movements succeed. This discussion is intended for people to learn to recognize the signs and to encourage the continuation of struggles for advancement of populations that need to work together towards stated missions, even when others come simply to disrupt, refocus the mission, or otherwise try to deter the work that is being done. We have an opening of a few video clips that will set the mood and set the tone for what it is that we're seeing. Each one is 1 to 2 minutes in length, and it's just 3 or 4 slides.
Violence is self-defeating. He who lives by the sword will perish by the sword.
You know, when you construct a man as a great man, there's nothing almost more satisfying than also seeing him as the opposite.
When the National Archives puts government documents up on the web, one has to confront them.
Tapes from the hotel rooms, FBI reports, those are pieces of information that we shouldn't have. The FBI was most alarmed about King because of his success.
He realized how sick this country was. We were trying to reveal the truth about segregation.
J. Edgar Hoover is famous for saying that he feared the rise of a black messiah.
The FBI says it's clear Martin Luther King Jr. is the most dangerous Negro in America, and we have to use every resource at our disposal to destroy him.
J. Edgar Hoover was the head of the FBI for 48 years.
The FBI's focus was collecting salacious sexual material of King with various girlfriends.
Hoover had made the speech that Martin Luther King was the world's most notorious liar.
Now, what am I going to do about Martin Luther King? Looks to me like he's too far gone.
This was a way that they could bring down a very influential black civil rights leader and contain the movement.
The FBI mailed a tape of Dr. King with other women to him and to Coretta with an advice that he should go kill himself.
The greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
Staying calm under fire is very hard when people are trying to kill you.
Anybody who was to the left of mainstream in civil rights was deemed a subversive.
They use surveillance in order to
foment violence,
break apart these organizations.
They were running a surveillance state.
This represents the darkest part of the Bureau's history.
Violence is self-defeating. He who lives by the sword will perish by the sword. Violence is self-defeating. He who lives by the sword will perish by the sword.
Okay, so you haven't necessarily read the report, but you are familiar with the term black identity extremists?
Well, I think so, yes.
So could you tell me what that term means to you? Do you believe that there is a movement of African Americans that identify themselves as black identity extremists, and what does that movement do?
Well, I'd be interesting to see the conclusions of that report, but I'm aware that there are groups that do have an extraordinary commitment to their racial identity, and some have transformed themselves even into violent activists.
Are you aware of white organizations that do this as well? Given that white supremacy is well-documented, well-researched movements such as the neo-Nazis, the Ku Klux Klan, etc., are they white identity extremists?
I didn't follow that question, please, again.
is there a term or a report on white identity extremists? You mentioned you were familiar with black people who identify with their racial identity.
Yes, but it's not coming to me at this moment.
Not coming to you?
It's
certainly a group such as the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes, and then the skinhead movements, but there's a racial identity white movements that have been identified for sure.
So has the FBI done a report on white identity extremists that are likely motivated to target law enforcement officers? Is there such
I'm not aware of that.
Okay, are you aware of a group called the Sovereign Citizens?
I've heard that group, yes.
And I believe that the Sovereign Citizens is primarily a white organization that absolutely has targeted police officers and killed police officers. You're not aware of that?
I'm not aware of all their crimes, but I know they're a group that's known to have violent tendencies.
Could you name an African-American organization that have committed violent acts against police officers? Could you name one today? In this report, they name organizations from 30, 40 years ago, but can you name of one today that has targeted police officers in a violent manner?
I believe I could, but I would want to be to confirm that and submit it to you in writing. But I believe we had, within the last year or so, 4 police officers killed by a group that some have described as extremists.
So what has happened is that there have been a couple of incidents in which African Americans did kill police officers who were not associated with a black organization. And so one, for example, in Baton Rouge was associated with Sovereign Citizens, which is primarily a white group. So you should know that there's a lot of concern in the community, especially from organizations such as Black Lives Matter. By the way, would you consider Black Lives Matter a black identity extremist group?
I'm not able to comment on that. I have not so declared it.
So you should know that a lot of activists around the country are very concerned that we're getting ready to repeat a very sad chapter of our history, where people who are rightfully protesting what they consider to be an injustice in their community, which is their relationship with police officers, are now being targeted and labeled as extremists and are going through periods of surveillance and harassment. And so I would like to know, what is your department going to do to protect the rights of average citizens to protest if they have a Okay, so you haven't necessarily read the report, but you are familiar.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The FBI and New York police departments are facing new calls to finally open their records related to the assassination of Malcolm X, shot dead 56 years ago at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, February 21st, 1965. This comes after the release of a deathbed confession of a former undercover New York police officer who admitted to being part of a broad New York police and FBI conspiracy targeting Malcolm. In the confession, the former officer, Raymond Wood, who died last year, admitted he entrapped 2 members of Malcolm's security team in another crime, a plot to blow up the Statue of Liberty, just days before the assassination. On Saturday, Ray Wood's cousin, Reggie Wood, read the letter at a news conference at the Shabazz Center. This is Democracy.
The report identified black identity extremists as a threat to law enforcement. Critics say the report is eerily similar to the FBI's 20th century counterintelligence program.
COINTELPRO was an FBI operation established in the 50s by J. Edgar Hoover to target African Americans who were fighting for justice and equality. He targeted Dr. King, he targeted Malcolm X, and over 80% of the targets of COINTELPRO were members of the Black Panther Party.
At the height of COINTELPRO, activists and community organizers were targeted. These include current Congressional Black Caucus members like John Lewis, Bobby Rush, Emmanuel Cleaver, and Barbara Lee.
The Church Committee in the mid-70s held hearings and determined that many of the actions and activities of COINTELPRO were really unconstitutional.
What you've described is a series of illegal actions intended squarely to deny First Amendment rights to some Americans. How shall we ensure
that it can never happen again?
As a community worker, I attended many Black Panther Party functions. I was part of the breakfast program. We registered many people, the African American community and others, to vote. Well, the FBI during COINTELPRO would try to turn members of the Black Panther Party against each other. Agent Provocateurs were placed within the party to try to sow dissent.
I was the coordinator of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. In December 4th, 1969, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, two members of the Black Panther Party, were murdered. And they put an informant, William O'Neill, planted him inside the Panther Party.
We can mourn today, but if we understood, Fred, that we are dedicated, that his life wasn't given in vain.
The National Director of FBI said that the Black Panther Party was the #1 threat to national security of this nation. And that created the condition for law enforcement agents all across this nation to go after Panthers. That program that they did, in some sense, we ought to be thankful for, because that put in writing for everybody to see we're still in the eyes of so many, nothing but a bunch of them. Was I surprised? No. I fully expected it to happen. Now the question is, how do we deal with it?
People need to get to their members of Congress and get them a copy of this report and hold their members of Congress accountable. In this day and time, they could really stop and halt the progressive movements that are taking place in the country. And I think with Black Lives Matter, with the Dreamers, with all of our millennials and what they're doing, they deserve to be out there and to protest and to engage in petitioning their government to right the wrongs of the past. Those of us who've been around, who saw COINTELPRO, really know the risks and the dangers, and so I hope that people really believe us that this happened, because this is COINTELPRO 2.0.
Okay, so we open up with a discussion of agent provocateurs versus infiltrators. An agent provocateur is a person who's employed by the government or the police to encourage certain groups of people to break the law. Or make them lose support. By the way, that slide was a little bit different from the original clip that was in there, that was under a minute. So I definitely wouldn't have included some of the language, but that's okay. Okay, and an infiltrator is a person who secretly becomes part of a group in order to get information or to influence the way the group thinks or behaves. So we will open with an exploration of the various social justice movements that have been out there from different perspectives, from different people, from different cultures, and show that this is not just only a focus on Black people, but it's every social justice organization that is put together. And there's a common thread here that we hope to have a discussion about. So we open now with Dr. Kent Meesplay, who will introduce himself and give us a little background information on the infiltration of indigenous movements.
Hello, it's good to be here. I've been a registered Green Party member since 1995 when I found out about the party and joined it in California. I figured Greens would care about the environment. What pleasantly surprised me was that social justice is also a major concern of Greens. Ever since 1985, I've been deeply concerned about Indigenous issues and rights. The social justice aspect of the Green Party made me feel at home. I'd never heard about COINTELPRO until 2004, when former Green Party presidential nominee David Cobb mentioned it while we were driving during the campaign season. He offered tips on driving so he couldn't easily be penned in. My understanding now is that COINTELPRO still exists, but operates under a different name. Years later, in 2016, I heard about COINTELPRO again, this time from my partner, also a former presidential candidate. While I was driving, I was admonished for not changing my route. So one tactic for survival, even in this day and age, is to not be highly predictable in one's travel routes. The three-letter agencies and other organized crime exist to maintain the status quo. There is a saying in China, the nail that sticks out is hammered down, and greens really stick out. We seek to transform the status quo into being more just. My main two interests in the party have to do with climate change and with treaty obligations. You see, upholding the nation-to-nation treaties that were made for practical reasons at the birth of our nation is actually written into the Constitution. Article 6, Section 2 of the US Constitution rightly proclaims that these contracts are the supreme law of the land. But a sleight of hand was done in 1871 when Congress passed the Indian Appropriations Act, which quite conveniently gave themselves the authority to legislate for the tribes. And it's been downhill ever since. There's something really wrong with a nation that will not honor its own essential founding documents. The sleight of hand doesn't cut it. At the extreme, activists for social justice are suicide-ed and accidented, even here in this so-called land of freedom. I know this to be true, and the losses have personally affected my life and the life of a loved one. Historically, many wrongs have been perpetrated against people of color, especially those who stand up for their rights, such as treaty rights. When we talk about infiltration and sabotage of good indigenous movements, it takes many forms, sometimes more obvious, sometimes more subtle and roundabout. The perpetrators are rarely held accountable. So then there become additional movements for justice for the imprisoned and slain advocates. I think of the late activist, poet, actor, and great man, John Trudell. His pregnant wife, 3 children, and mother-in-law were killed in 1979 in a suspicious fire at the home of his parents-in-law. The house fire that killed his family happened within 24 hours of him burning a US flag on the steps of the FBI building in Washington, DC, in protest of the government's treatment of Native Americans and the Sioux Nation. Trudell believed that the fire was meant to threaten and silence him and his activist wife. And we see this common thread. When activists are arrested, it has nothing to do with justice. It has to do with intimidation and stopping a movement. The hidden powers that be typically have operatives who blend in and are often nearby to the person advocating for respect, treaty rights, and honest treatment. The murder of Trudell's family was likely carried out through accomplices of the local tribal police chief and the BIA, that's Bureau of Indian Affairs superintendent. Guess who investigated the fire? The BIA. So of course the finding was not arson. Another case of the fox guarding the henhouse. I read from Wikipedia, the FBI has been implicated in wrongdoing in Pine Ridge and other reservations during this period, which included offering monetary support to Dickie Wilson's Guardians of the Oglala Nation, the goons that you might have heard about years ago. Essentially the goons, paid by Dickie Wilson, who in turn was paid by the FBI, the then banned council chief elected in what many believe was a rigged election, terrorized and murdered traditional Sioux people who spoke out against federal government treatment of American Indian people. Back to more recent events. I talked with a longtime Green about her experiences with activists and saboteurs. She said there were people who would show up to meetings and be genuinely anxious to become involved in building the party and doing good work. They stopped showing up. She later found out that each person had been approached and threatened or educated to stop attending. This answered her question as to why people stopped showing up. In one Texas city, there was good Indigenous Green outreach and progress done that was later demolished by an Indigenous person. The local party collapsed because of his efforts. The Indigenous person who destroyed the local party was a paid informant, and his actions almost cost somebody their life. Sometimes a person who is mentally unstable will really cause problems. Greens value diversity and are often eager to include newcomers, sometimes giving them positions of authority without vetting them and observing them over time. Our strength of inclusion has been used against us. The blocking no vote can really hold things up, whether it is done by a narcissist or by a paid infiltrator. In another case, there was someone who had volunteered at Katrina and for all intents and purposes appeared to be legitimate. He probably was. Then he moved to Austin, Texas, and was turned to become an informant. As part of his strategy, he brought in people who then exhibited negative behavior. These people most likely were unaware of the nefarious intentions of their recruiter, and they became the ones doing damage. So it's not always the infiltrator per se doing the damage, but the people they bring in who are of questionable mind and intent. When someone who is already active is turned against the people they are working with, it can be very difficult to sort this out. I want to talk about Leonard Peltier. I first heard about him when I was a teenager in the 70s. I first thought his name was Peltier, French, but it's Peltier. Mr. Peltier has been a political prisoner since 1977. The FBI is adamant that he never be released. In a Huffington Post recent article, it was noted that the 1977 trial was, quote, riddled with misconduct, and there was no evidence that he committed a crime. Those who know what went on know that Mr. Peltier is innocent, and there are links to these things on the page. This is a handbag made by Leonard Peltier. I thought of that today, that I would show it, a project of his in prison. I bought it in Austin, Texas at a fundraiser for him. He made it before the COVID-19 lockdowns, which had prevented him from painting and doing other creative work. I intend to embellish it with beadwork, one of my hobbies. It will be a gift at the right time. I briefly note that AIM, the American Indian Movement, has been targeted by the CIA in addition to the FBI. The ongoing problem that really corrupts our federal government at different levels is what's been called the issue of the fox and the hen house. This book is by, you can't really see it there, The Fox and the Hen House by C. Kahn and Elizabeth Minnick. These are how privatization threatens democracy. They had looked some years ago at why there are so many problems with our nation, and it all goes back to this, a conflict of interest, and it's much worse since 2008 or whenever that was written. In 2016, an Oglala Sioux woman, a water protector named Red Dawn Fallis, was arrested for allegedly discharging a handgun. The handgun was registered to the FBI, it turned out. Her partner, with whom she developed a romantic interest, turned out to be an informant. She has since served a 4-year sentence. There were 700 water protectors arrested, and Fallis's sentence was the worst. Again, it's to make an example of someone and intimidate and threaten the rest of the movement. It has nothing to do with justice. Fallis's arrest was on land that would still belong to the Great Sioux Nation had the US government honored the Fort Lawrence Treaties of 1851, and Fort Laramie Treaties of 1851 and 1868. As I read that wrong, I knew something was amiss. So let's see, the clash of cultures that we have, let me finish with that. It should be noted that authorities were brought in across state lines back during the Standing Rock events, and they were paid for by the energy company building the Dakota Access Pipeline, which is a clear conflict of interest, and it's bald-faced corporatism. The clash of cultures is one between those who have a materialistic, short-sighted way of life and those who feel a more authentic, deeper connection to Mother Earth. It only looks like the materialistic ones are winning for the moment. A long time ago, I was told to treat infiltrators the same as everyone else. This can be hard to do. Also, this is sometimes a case of love thine enemy. This can be really hard to do. But ultimately, the deeper green movement in concert with indigenous perspectives will prevail, because it is that which will help us transform and survive. Those who need to change are often fearful of the change, so it is important to be loving and patient, even as we struggle to protect the life on this planet. Nonviolence is not the absence of action. It takes courage and is also good strategy. It can be frustrating to deal with infiltrators. Part of their tactic is to try to wear us down. I know of likely infiltrators in the Green Party. I won't mention their names because A, I don't want to show my hand, and B, I have no proof and I might be wrong. However, I view and discuss their actions through the lens of, yeah, they're probably an infiltrator, and I'm careful what I say around them. I should note that these people include longtime Greens who apparently have also done some good for the party. That's part of the blending in. Of course, there are factions that are at odds in the party. This is to be expected, and it produces dynamic tension at best. People come from their varied backgrounds and political affiliations. Sometimes I think the animal, the okapi, would be a good mascot for the Green Party. The animal looks like it was assembled from parts of different animals, antelope, giraffe, etc. Well, that would be us. Absent federal, and wrapping up now, absent federal leadership on the important matters in our lives, I will close with the following advice. Grow more of your own food, share seeds. If you have extra seedlings that you know won't fit in your garden bed, share them with neighbors and encourage them to grow more of their own food and medicinal plants. Do what you can to support your local neighborhood economy. I mean, that was part of that was what the Black Panthers were about, was helping each other, right? Share, barter, and trade. Look out for one another. Our federal government has failed us in so many ways. I would like to thank the National Black Caucus and the Annual National Meeting Committee for having me on. Blessings.
Thank you, Dr. Kent. So next we will have Rita Gonzalez Jackson, who works in both Indigenous and African-American and has done a lot of work with both movements. And she will share experiences with infiltration of leftist movements from her experiences over the past.
Okay. I'll start off going back all the way to Ohio, where I was working with a Black Liberation Group, which I will
And are we having problems with sound? Does everyone else hear Rita?
Is sound okay?
Okay, now it is.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. Okay, as I was saying, starting in the state of Ohio, I was working with a Black Liberation Group. I won't name the group because they're still working in that area. They were considered revolutionary. We were organizing in the community, recruiting, and we also had an educational component where we would get together and study. And so there were different study groups based on your location. And so we had a pretty strong, a nice sized group. What we encountered was surveillance, and largely through the telephone. Back then, of course, it was still the landlines, and the cell phones were, you know, those old style cell phones that are now antiquated. But you would get on the phone and you'd hear these clicks, and that's when you knew you were being recorded. Of course, that's the technology has changed over the years, so you could be recorded and not be aware of it. But we encountered those kind of problems where our conversations on the phone were recorded. These days, you don't have to be on the phone for your phone to record you. You're being surveilled without actually being on your phone. Your phone just has to be in your general vicinity for you to be recorded, which my son-in-law has proved to me several times. But we also had to be concerned with infiltrators. There was really a class issue within the group as well. And those that were in university were in the, how would I say it, the upper echelon in the power positions of power, whereas those that came out of the community were in lesser positions and did all the work, as well as the women, because it was very patriarchal. And some of the ones in the upper positions, there were a few that were questionable as far as they were very well to do for being in university. They weren't considered struggling students. And we couldn't really accuse anyone, but we were just very careful, because you just couldn't go around accusing anybody, but you just had to be careful. But mostly our concerns were with surveillance. And I worked with that group as well as with cultural nationalists. The cultural nationalists were a little tighter group and knew each other a lot better. I tend to think that there weren't any infiltrators in that group because everybody knew everybody and had known each other for a good deal of time and worked together on a lot of different projects. From there, I've been all over the country, but in North Carolina specifically, I've worked with both groups, with the Black community as well as with the Latino community. And one that really stands out, real brazen, and which, just coming out of left field, I worked with a group, I will mention the name because they're no longer in existence, the Latin American Women's Club. And it wasn't even a political group. It was a civic group, but even in those groups, you have infiltrators and people that come in and disrupt things, because what they're looking at is leadership of any kind, and that could be dangerous. Anybody that's a leader and has the potential to be a leader, they're very cautious about. They want to keep their eyes and ears open and track who's doing what in the community. And my friend Nora had started the organization from scratch, and it was around for many years, and it was very productive. And I was on her board, and she was bringing someone else in that she wanted to add to the board, and we all had to, it had to be a unanimous vote. So she talked to us all separately. Then she brought the young lady in, and we voted her in at very same day. It was also her first day as being on the board, the very first board meeting for her. And when she was allowed her turn to speak, the very first question out of her mouth was, what do you do if the executive director does something wrong? How do you go about replacing the executive director? And everybody's mouth just fell open, because Nora had just brought her in, and already she was trying to figure out how to replace her. We didn't know where this was all coming from. I had never met this woman before. She had cozied up to the director, and she was impressed by her. Needless to say, it occurred to everybody, we got to get rid of this lady. And from then on, she was disrupting every meeting, and things would come back from because I was also on the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce board, and remarks that she was saying about that other organization was coming out there. And that was just a huge problem. It did turn out later she had a brain tumor. So I don't know how much of that was attributed to that, but it was very disruptive, and nothing changed until she was voted out. Luckily, we had that in the bylaws, so that was able to be accomplished because she was missing meetings, so we were able to get her out on that technicality. But anyways, what I found out and learned, and actually I heard this from someone, actually was on YouTube now that I think about it, but it was a gentleman, we could consider him a conspiracy theorist, if you like, but what he said made good sense, is that if you are a company or a person or an industry that is destroying the environment with your pollution or whatever, then what you do is you join an environmental group like you're trying to help, but you're really not. If you're working against the environment, or you're working against a particular ideology or a particular cause, and you're actually the problem, you join that organization that's supposedly trying to solve that problem, because you're really trying to rock the boat. You don't want success in that field, because they're upsetting your bottom line, which is your money. So you go in there, act like, yeah, I'm here to help, but you're really not. So you have to be aware of those kind of things. And you do have to be aware of the people that are coming in, because sometimes it's not just COINTELPRO. Sometimes it's just people with a big ego. Maybe it's a narcissist. And they just want the power. They want the glory. They want the attention on themselves. They haven't worked out those things, those issues, those weaknesses in themselves. So you don't want to be that person. You be aware of what your own weaknesses are. If you don't want to be one of those that get bought, because everybody does have their price, figure out what your price is and make sure that nobody can meet that price. Because at one point in time, I could have been bought if they had had a kidney for my son who needed it. I could have been bought. At this point in time, nobody can buy me, because nobody has anything that I want. If you don't want anything, nobody can buy you. But you have to know your own weaknesses. And you have to be very careful. People appeal to your vanity. Figure out what your weakness is so that they can't use it against you. And the people that like to get in these positions of power, you have to remember, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I forget who said that quote. I'm gonna have to look it up and find out who said it. But it does. It just it goes to their head. It's like crack or something. I don't know. It's a drug, and it gets good to them. You know, it's a lifestyle. Going to meetings and being addressed, and yes, Madam Chairman or whatever. It's a drug. It's an adrenaline rush. Endorphins are popping all over. And everybody else is down at the bottom, and they're way at the top, and they're flying high. This lifestyle is really good to them. And they forgot, this is a job. We're doing a service. We're serving the people, not the other way around. But I do want you to remember that we're being surveilled all the time, right now, by our phones, by our TVs, by our smart meters that track electricity. They have the technologies now for face recognition. If you're walking along the street, they know who you are. in China, they have this social merit thing going on. Don't think that they're not going to transfer that and start doing that over here so they can track your behavior. That's what it's going to come to. Okay, now I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it's going to happen. So you just need to be aware. Continue doing the work. That's what's important. Do the work. Be aware. Watch out for the infiltrators and the disruptors. Get past them. You got to keep doing the work regardless of what they're trying to do. But just recognize. I hope I said enough.
Thank you, Rita. And you're absolutely correct. I think, you know, it's not conspiracy theory to realize that in today's climate, a lot of times they have these things called algorithms that follow what you like to watch and follow what you like to hear and what you like to read, and they make suggestions accordingly, which in turn reinforces your behavior. So you're not too far off there. Thank you very much. And so next, Philena Farley was going to share with us her experiences with division among ADOS and Black liberation movements. She says that she has oh, there she is, right on time. I was going to say we were going to move on, but hi, Philena, you're right on time. So she gave us a notice that she's having some technical issues. So if she has some problems, we'll help her out and just continue.
I'm here. I'm just now have to be on my phone.
Okay, thank you. Are you able to see the screen to keep you kind of guided, or do you need the screen?
Yeah, yeah, please leave the screen up. I just can't, I can't, pull up the other websites, but that's okay.
I can do that if you need it to be. Okay. So let me know when.
Oh, okay. First, let me introduce what I was my timeline here. So this timeline is pretty much starting around 2015 in the early starts of it. But it really picked up steam after the 2016 elections. High points were around 2017 through 19. And these were the separate, it wasn't just Black liberation movements, it was specifically for reparations without focusing on the Black agenda. And the reason why I wanted to make a distinction between the two is because of the tactics that were used to, I guess, squash the movement. And there were some outside players here, and they did mostly everything that the previous speakers have spoke about did happen with these groups. One is called the ADOS movement, which is the American Descendants of Slavery. And the other movement was the Foundational Black Americans. These movements are still going on strong today, but not as strong as they were at the beginning. And they lost a lot of momentum due to infighting about which group was really about reparations and which group was the COINTELPRO. So it was the tactic that they use is like, that group's COINTELPRO. No, that group's COINTELPRO. No, that group's COINTELPRO. And then the way I can best describe it is that the way we as Greens saw it as it made sure that a lot of these African Americans and Black Americans and Pan Americans did not look at us at all as an alternative. And that seemed like was the overall goal of all of it, because it was always no reparations, no vote, no Black agenda, no vote. And we did, I would say, grab a few out of that. I would say like 1% of that movement knew that, wait a minute, here's the Green Party, they have a Black agenda and they have reparations. We don't have to not vote, we do have an option. So we did have a lot of people come to the party, or at least vote for Green Party candidates. But the majority were busy fighting each other and convincing each other not to vote, or to vote down ballot. Just don't vote for president and vote for local Democrats. That was the thing. It was, they only mentioned us a few times, but they didn't really give us any like strong support. Both sides really didn't do that. And then they did attack the reparations organizations that's been in it for a while, like NCOBRA and NARC. But the problem was, again, that those organizations still defended Democrats, and saying that these organizations are used to get Black people not to vote to help Trump win. So they were still pushing that narrative and leaving us out. So no matter which side of this debate you were on, we were just left out of it altogether, pretty much. So there was no real social justice movement for Black liberation at all from either side of the story. So that's the tale that we have to tell. And another thing that happened, could you pull up the screen again for me? Sorry. Another thing that was kind of positive that happened is the 2020 census. And that was actually a good action item to push, because when it came to lineage and reparations, and every time we fill out our census, we just check Black or African American, and we don't have anything to put down for ethnicity. So the so-called protests with the US Census was to check Black and African American checkbox, but right for ethnicity, either descendants of chattel slavery or descendants of slavery, or a foundational Black American, or foundational. Since Black and African was already checked off, we didn't have to repeat that part in the, usually put descendants of slavery. And that did catch a lot of attention. I know it had to be very high numbers of people that did do that, because the Trump administration tried to end the census earlier than it was scheduled. But they didn't say why. And they didn't specifically say why, but that was the reason why they did that, because the government was seeing people putting that in there. So if you say, well, we don't know who's who, but you got all these people claiming that, yeah, they are part that would receive reparations. So they had some solid numbers. And so that was, that's when I think the COINTELPRO got even worse, and they really had to die down this movement. They really did, because that was actually a good action item strategy. So another thing though, after that, it seems like the ADOS oh, another thing they did is that they put using modern monetary theory, or MMT, to pay for reparations. And then it seems like after they became a 501c4 and changed their website, now it's all about what Biden and Kamala Harris can do and what they have to do. And it was just about them, and not they like took away the language of what reparations in a Black agenda would look like. It was more informative website. Now it's more demanding the president and vice president specific things instead of what they want to accomplish. It just went into, you do this, you do this, you do that. So that also lost a lot of momentum. I would say that out of these groups now, the strongest of these groups are the ones that are trying to do it at the local or state levels. And a lot of these people that are doing it at the local and state levels voted Green. So I guess us in the Green Party, in our platform, they saw us like we have to like at least start at the local level, and pretty much like marijuana, state by state, try to get this done until it's done at the national. And some people say just do both until we could get this done. So I would say, yeah, that's what I've seen statistically. I've been monitoring the hashtags. The critique that we got on our platform is that we need a section break after B for our reparations plank, and say, okay, this is the reparations part that we want. And then the rest of it, when it starts at Black and Brown, that should be the Black agenda part. And we'll, we can work on that. That's not like a serious critique. That's, I guess, when you want to say an English teacher might take off 5 points if they like you, 10 points if they don't. It's not really a big deal, but we accepted it as like, but it was like pulling teeth trying to get like, what's wrong with the Green Party's reparations platform? What's wrong with it? What's wrong with it? And after asking over and over and asking different people, that's pretty much the gist of what was wrong with our platform, section break. So that was like, okay. But some people just saw that as like, that's kind of like lowballing, like that's no reason to not vote Green. They try to make that a reason to not vote Green, and it didn't fly for a lot of, I would say, woke people. That's like, what? That's not a bad critique. Okay, it's a critique, but it's not something to just be like, okay, I'm not going to vote for Green Party because they didn't put this section break in it. It's just so.
And where would they? We're looking at the screen. Where did they want the section break inserted?
After the B section, so you have the section itself, and then the A and B, and then at the C where it's talking about Black and Brown, that should be like rewritten as, okay, and here's the Black agenda.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
So it's, it's just that it was written kind of all together.
Well, thank you very much for sharing some insights into, more efforts to disrupt and create disharmony in social justice movements from on the ground.
Yep, no problem.
So the next part is Gil Obler is going to speak with us about his experiences in the Green Party and his experiences with Black liberation movements. Gil is not feeling well today, but he still made sure he was here to share with us. And hopefully you're okay, Gil, and can move forward with what you were going to discuss with us.
Yeah, thank you. As has already been described, you know, you have agent provocateurs, but then you have all kinds of other types of disruptive or exclusionary behavior. And with all of those, you know, there are tells for that, but they're often not conclusive. And, you know, it'd be easy to say, just like, kick all the agent provocateurs and other disruptive people out. But often that's very difficult to do and to prove. So I wanted to focus on other ways of coping with the behavior and with the infiltration and so on. The first part of my slide, I just, kind of list, aside from the agent provocateurs who work for a governmental agency or the police or, or at least are informants of them. You also have people coming in with agendas from other NGOs or other perspectives, as was mentioned in some of the previous things, people who might just be making money destroying the environment. Another type of tell can be narcissists and bullies. Often their tells are that they make everything interpersonal, about themselves rather than about the movement. Often they also hide behind process as a way of blocking. That was mentioned, I think, in a couple of the other talks. Using blocking mechanisms, process mechanisms to thwart, what would otherwise be consensus about the movement goals. I've been in the Green Party since 2000. After the Nader campaign, I got involved with merging the Green Party and the Rainbow Coalition Party in Massachusetts, which led me in 2008 to work with Cynthia McKinney when she ran for president. And I ended up being a liaison between the Green Party and the Reconstruction Party movement that was forming, both of which were supporting her campaign for president. And as a consequence, I met Pam Africa, Kalia Clark, Kalia Kuno. Pam immediately got me involved with the Free Mumia movement, the Move 9 and other political prisoner movements. Kalia ran for Senate. She was the SNCC organizer in Mississippi in 1962, special assistant to Medgar Evers. She was approached by the Ford Foundation with millions of dollars, as was mentioned by somebody about being bought. She was thankfully strong enough not to be bought. So these, those things all I became exposed to. When I first joined the Free Mumia movement in New York, I'm a big white guy, middle class. A lot of people actually, because of that, thought I was an agent provocateur or a cop. Thankfully, Pam Africa and Cynthia McKinney and others vouched for me. But once they realized I wasn't a cop, they actually put me doing security for Pam and Ramona Africa, trying to use my white privilege and my physical whatever, because a lot of cops would sometimes think I was an undercover, and they would, they wouldn't harass Pam and Ramona when I would intervene, because they thought, oh, he's an undercover, I don't want to blow their cover. So we kind of used that against them. Another situation, I helped organize the buses that would go down from New York to Philadelphia for the Mumia movement. And this probably was not an agent provocateur or even outside agenda. I think this was just somebody who was maybe a little white supremacist and maybe a little crazy. But she came on the bus with us and then physically tried to attack Pam Africa. And of course, people came to Pam. I put my body in the way in a nonviolent way to prevent that. But then other people were really angry, and I realized the police wanted they would want a fight between people from the movement. So I ended up actually protecting the individual who attacked Pam, but walking them away from the rest of the folks. I realized I couldn't put them on the bus coming back to New York. So our organization actually paid for them to take the train back to New York. But that was a way of coping with a situation which could have like broken the solidarity of the group or work in favor of intervention by the police on the street, which would have been a bad, So whether they were actually consciously provoking or whether they just were convenient, these are examples of coping with that kind of situation. I think within the Green Party, well, before I get to the Green Party, between 2016 and 2020, I ended up getting involved with the Uhuru movement. I was the chair of the Uhuru Solidarity movement, which was doing internationalist-based reparations programs, such as the Black Power Blueprint in St. Louis, Ferguson, Missouri. Our group was also, we were going out tabling with Impedum, which was the Black Mass movement of that reparations movement in New York. So some white folks who were ADOS supporters started coming to our meetings. They weren't that disruptive, but what we noticed after they showed up was that an ADOS person would, whenever we would table with Impedum on the street, an ADOS person would somehow show up and they would interfere with our work on the street. Because we were presenting, the internationalist approach and reparations as the means of production and not just as a poverty program. And then within the green movements, we've all, without naming names, we've all seen people who come in, for instance, the caucuses, to the Black Caucus, to the Latin Caucus, to the Elders Caucus, try to take over. When they don't take over, they start doing the interpersonal stuff, the process stuff, and in many cases are openly against the caucus. In some cases, trying to prevent accreditation of the Elders Caucus right now. In other cases, creating conspiracy theories about the Black Caucus. It's interesting that one of them is extremely misogynistic and has helped push a lot of Black women out of the party, but also has been an opponent of affirmative action in our staff hiring processes. So you see, and this was a member of the Black Caucus. So you see these tells, and as other people have said, coping sometimes is just active facilitation to keep the discussion on topic, to prevent people from jumping the stack, from bullying other people. One of the really, instead of shutting them down, one of the tactics, if you will, that I learned over the years is to say, yeah, okay, that's fine, but I really want to hear what so-and-so was saying, somebody who was saying something on topic and who was interrupted. So you intervene on behalf of the person who, and in the process, you bring things back to the topic and also are enforcing, listening to each other and not interrupting each other, not bullying each other. And often, if you didn't do those things, that person who had been interrupted and not listened to wouldn't come back. So at the end of my slide, I list some other things: childcare, disability access, travel costs, and digital divide. Why do I mention them? I mean, the best defense that you can have is to bring members of the community, people who are authentic members of the community, who are fighting for the goals of whatever it is that you're fighting for, whether it's the Black Liberation Movement or it's climate action or single-payer healthcare, jobs, etc. Those people are, you know, if you can bring them in and support them with these things, and make them feel welcome, then they're much less apt to be pushed out by the bullies and the interpersonal and the nonsense, because they recognize those people. They have something real at stake. Anyway, so those are some of the coping ideas in terms, you know, aside from just identifying provocateurs and infiltrators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gil, for your wonderful insights that will help many of us in the future that are working, you know, with genuine hearts towards actual social progress. So next we have a bit of a clip from another Democracy Now! Presentation. And it's an interesting clip that we thought we would share with you. And we'll go from there into a description of more look further into organizational infiltration and continue this discussion.
Since this is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report, I'm Amy Goodman. Today, we look at an explosive new film that shines a bright light on the FBI's shadowy use of informants and its counterterrorism sting operations. These undercover operatives are meant to root out would-be terrorists before they attack. Since 9/11, they've been used to prosecute at least 158 people, but critics argue they're often the targeting the wrong people. A 2014 report by Human Rights Watch found the FBI is focused on, quote, particularly vulnerable people, including those with intellectual and mental disabilities and the indigent. Well, a new documentary that just premiered here in New York at the Tribeca Film Festival takes us inside the world of particular informant who has played a key role in several major terrorism cases. And it does so while he's in the middle of carrying out his latest sting operation. It's called Terror. The T is in parentheses to put the emphasis on error.
Okay, so that is an interesting film. I hope that we all kind of look into. I will try to escape full screen and move to the next screen. So organizational infiltration by government and other organizations. We've had some very interesting discussions regarding attempts by other non-governmental organizations, and we want to talk a little bit about government infiltration. I will go ahead and share my screen again. So these are just some snippets, and the links are here. They will be provided as references, and all of the things that we've shown in this presentation will be provided as references, as an attachment to this presentation. But here you see a snippet from a couple of magazine or newspaper articles that talk about different things that have been done by the government. The NYPD embedded at least one undercover informant among protesters demonstrating against police violence in the wake of George Floyd's death. A newly unsealed court filing reveals the disclosure was buried in an FBI affidavit in the case of Jeremy Trapp, who was arrested by the NYPD on July 17th after he allegedly attempted to cut the brake lines on an NYPD van parked in Brooklyn. Unnamed police sources at the time told the New York Daily News at the time that Trapp was part of Occupy City Hall, a group calling for the NYPD to be defunded. There was another one where there was a guy who was dressed, I guess, okay, this isn't the one, but there's someone that had another police officer among the protesters. Questioned why he why he appeared to be drinking a beer and saying F the cops, according to an email obtained by the Grand Forks Herald. And in the email to the police department, Husbandson admitted his undercover actions did not have the police chief's permission nor follow protocol. He said he wore plain clothes and monitored agitators, took photos for potential investigations, and watched for weapons. He wrote that he grabbed an empty Coors Light can off the street and looked in vehicles for guns while saying in a casual, low voice, "Yeah, F those police," he wrote in an email. And then there's another excerpt where it says United States law enforcement from the ACLU says United States law enforcement agencies from the FBI to local police have a long history of spying on American citizens and infiltrating or otherwise obstructing political activist groups. Political spying was rampant during the Cold War under COINTELPRO, another program. Unfortunately, it appears that these old tendencies have once again come to the fore. Law enforcement agencies across America continue to monitor and harass groups and individuals for doing little more than peacefully exercising their First Amendment rights. Another one from justsecurity.org. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz echoed the sentiment in a press conference on Saturday, alleging that the demonstrations that caused so much damage included provocateurs, likely from outside the area. State officials said around 80% of those arrested in the Twin Cities on Friday were from outside Minnesota. Former FBI agent and CNN commentator Josh Campbell wrote that Minnesota authorities have been monitoring alleged criminals online, including postings by suspected white supremacists trying to incite violence. So we have to watch out for the protester people, once again, from outside that are in with the protesters. Before the rioting started in Washington, D.C., Brooklyn, Denver, Atlanta, and other cities, allegations emerged that undercover police officers might be to blame for some of the worst commercial destruction in Minneapolis. Experts on political violence, and not just QAnon conspiracy theorists, shared stories on social media that the May 27th looting and arson at AutoZone by an unidentified man in a gas mask carrying an open umbrella was not necessarily a protester, but could be an agent provocateur or a member of the police. In video posted to YouTube, while this man smashed windows with a hammer, protesters at the scene accused him of being an outsider and began to film him. Lastly, the FBI infiltrated middle-aged peace activists and filed trumped-up charges of them providing assistance to terrorists. The bogus charges were eventually dropped. The FBI first became interested in Tom and his fellow travelers on the eve of the 2008 Republican National Convention in St. Paul, Minnesota, when the bureau that purports to keep America safe sent an undercover agent who went by the name Karen Sullivan to infiltrate the Twin Cities Anti-War Committee, one of the most prominent groups organizing protests outside the convention. I remember a woman who was really eager, Tom told me. She kept bringing up how eager she was about the revolution. And on the other hand, people think it's good because we really need to change society. So it's a fine thing to talk about. On the other hand, she was trying to find people she could manipulate into committing a crime. Now, this is an excerpt from one of those right-wing kind of sites, but they have some really good pointers and they talk about other movements and infiltration. And the link again will be provided, in a list of references. But they have some very good pointers on their site too about how to spot and how to manage agent provocateurs. During our previous recording, one of the people that was attending talked about the big bankrolls that some come in with that want to help by contributing large amounts of money to provide immediate value to the group. There's a lot of different ways that you can check to see if where they say they live is real, find out if their past is actually, checks out. If, some of the things they say have happened to them or that they were involved in were really, what role did they really play in whatever organization. They steer group members into tackling unrelated missions. In other words, I'm seeing a lot of chat about some green song, Row the Greens or whatever. I mean, stuff that has nothing really to do with the organization and really probably likely could provide very little value. But hey, it's their great idea and it will send people off talking about and expending energy in directions that really do not need to be pursued towards the goal of the organization. They inject a lot of drama into the group. We've seen a lot of that within the Green Party where, People come in and they will hang on to something someone writes, and they want to start people arguing and going back and forth based on a sentence that someone wrote, or just basically an attempt to try to discredit their participation in the organization by highlighting, minor things and trying to blow them into something that can be used to curry disfavor and disruption in the group. So they amplify existing interpersonal problems between members, also in an effort to weaken the group. They have inconsistent or underdeveloped beliefs. To gain access to your group, they crammed what was available online. They will parrot community beliefs without understanding the meaning or intent behind them. And we see a lot of people out there that may or may not understand what the 10 key values and the 4 pillars of the Green Party are. They just will cite them and kind of distort, what's actually written into something else. So the next thing we had was kind of a brainstorming session on how do we deter organizational infiltration. I believe that Dr. Meesplay and Gil Obler both kind of touched on this as far as bringing the conversation back around, not giving them the center stage, being bystanders and watchers when someone's trying to disrupt and or target someone. There are different ways to manage them, including bringing things back around to the topic that's supposed to be discussed. Some of the ideas we came up with as a group: going underground, create working groups, which are comprised of trusted members. And that's something Rita touched on, who have demonstrated their commitment to the organization through regular attendance and contributing work that aligns with the mission of the organization. Structure: have a clear and detailed set of bylaws that are inclusive yet clearly support the mission of the organization as originally designed. So when people come in and they say, well, we want to change your bylaws and it should say this. And usually it's something so far from the original document, that they're really trying to alter the direction of the mission and perception by outsiders who come in and they look at things like bylaws and they say, what the heck, are these people really standing for? Vetting: do you know who your new members are? Where did they come from? What is their interest in your organization? Have this clearly stated and recorded somewhere to remind everyone when agents provocateurs try to steer the mission of the organization into new directions that are not reflective of your group's intended mission. Active facilitation: staying on topic, refocusing on our goals and shared values. And then we'll open up for discussion. And once again, in closing, the key to this discussion is not to be paranoid or finger anyone, but education and awareness. Many of us join these movements from the heart, while other orgs and agencies may not want to see leftist movements succeed. This discussion is intended for people to learn to recognize the signs and to encourage the continuation of struggles for advancement of populations that need to work together towards stated missions, even when others come simply to disrupt, refocus the mission, or otherwise try to deter the work that is being done. So that is the end of our presentation. And once again, our references will be listed. Now we move on to open discussion if anyone has anything else to say prior to closing. So are there any additions to this discussion?
Well, there was one thing that I did not mention, if that's okay. I think I just stated it in a different way, but originally I had used the phrase that my kids used to say back in the day. And this was in terms of the disruptors, not necessarily agent provocateurs, but the disruptors like the narcissists and the egotists that just wanted to be all about them and the focus be on them. And my kids used to say, check yourself before you wreck yourself. and because that's what will happen, because you go in there, you start disrupting things, pitting people against each other, playing these games. Eventually people catch on You know, you're just leaving a path of destruction. You think nobody's going to notice that you're doing this? I mean, eventually people do catch on. People aren't that stupid. And at the same time, use it for yourself, because you don't want anybody yanking your chain, you know, pitting you against somebody else. You're in control of yourself, your emotions, your thoughts. Don't let anybody else try to control you and manipulate you. You're not their puppet. So don't let them play you. Don't let them yank your chain.
Thank you, Rita. And that is so easy to do, especially for people that are really passionate about the causes we join. I know I've fallen for it several times, and I'm at the point now where I just walk away like, okay, you go do what you're going to do, because like Rita says, eventually, you know, it'll become apparent, although a lot of time will be lost in the process. Well, you know, so for those of us that will remain involved in social justice movements, you know, the key is to spot them, watch them, and just keep working, keep our noses to the grindstone and stay on track, and not allow them to win.
Yeah,
so go ahead.
In addition to what Rita and you just said, you know, often they'll attack people in the group or interrupt them. And so, you know, one of the things you can do just to combat that erosive effect is to really be proactive about reaching out and supporting people, you know, outside the meeting too, not just in terms of active facilitation in the meeting, but after the meeting, make sure those people come back, you know, because you'll have this pattern that somebody, you know, you might not think it was a big deal in the meeting, but they don't come back. And but if you make the call and say, you know, the way you were treated is not okay, and we're going to stand up for you, and we want you as part of our movement. You know, if you do that early on and persistently and consistently, you know, you can counteract the effect these disruptors have. You know, so just support your people. You know.
Thank you.
That's a good point.
And is there any other insight, wisdom to be shared from experiences here? Thoughts? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share one final time our references, although they're going to be attached. We just want to ensure that no one believes that we're taking intellectual property. We appreciate the work that others have put into this. We are not endorsing any of the sources or any of the places that these cursory searches come from, but there is some good information there, and there's probably additional good information that can be provided in any discussion links that people are able to attach or reference, you know, in further discussions on this. So once again, thank you very much for attending our presentation, and I wish everyone well. And that's the end. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Dee.